the book of Acts, chapter 22. Let's finish up 22. It won't take but just a second. While you're finding Acts 22, when you find in Acts 22, let me say this while you're finding Acts 22. We're going to finish up just the last portion. Now, when you get to this point, you remember when we first started the book of Acts, especially in Acts chapter number 2, man, there was a bunch of doctrinal stuff, and in chapter 7 and chapter 10 and 15 and so on and so forth. I mean, it was some heavy stuff. But once you get to where we are now, we're in 22. We're going to finish 23 and 24, hopefully tonight, if y'all will listen fast. Then we only have 4 more chapters left, 25, 26, 27, 28, and that'll be it for the book of Acts. Most of this is a lot of narrative. It's not a lot of, I'm going to start reading, I'm going to pause and comment on some things and give you maybe some words that, or maybe something, a sentence that's structured in a way that you might not understand what's going on. And I'm gonna do that and stop and comment and all that kind of stuff. But while you're finding, we're fixing to go to Acts 22. Let me give you just what we're fixing to read from here on out. From here on out, Apostle Paul is in jail. Well, in custody. He's bounced around from these different places, okay? In 23, chapter 23, when we start chapter 23, he goes before the Sanhedrin. Now, if you don't know what the Sanhedrin is, it's a group. It's a group that's made up of Pharisees and Sadducees. And it's a group that, matter of fact, if you remember, before they crucified Jesus, Jesus had to go before the Sanhedrin. And after that, he went before Pilate, which was Roman. And I'll explain all that in a minute. Now, in chapter 24, Paul goes before a governor named Felix. And Paul gives his testimony before Felix. Hopefully we're going to read that tonight. Then after Felix moves to a different area, and then Governor Festus. Now, that's not Festus on Gunsmoke. Wasn't it Gunsmoke Festus was on? Anyway, that's not the same Festus, all right? This is a different one, and he takes Felix's place as governor. So Paul goes before Festus. And then in chapter 26, Paul goes before King Agrippa. If you remember, a lot of sermons have been preached in Acts 26. Almost thou hast persuaded me to be a Christian. We have a song in our hymn book, Almost Persuaded. That's based upon the story of Paul going before King Agrippa. In chapter 27, which is not up here, they're headed toward Rome, where Paul should have been in to begin with. And there's a big storm that comes. The storm is named Euroclydon, and it causes the ship to go shipwreck, and Paul floats, and all the prisoners that are on there float ashore, and all this kind of stuff, almost lost their life, etc. That happens in 27. And then in chapter 28, Paul goes before Caesar. And that is in Rome. Where was Paul supposed to be? Rome. Here's the key. The Lord Jesus Christ wanted the Apostle Paul to go to Rome to preach to the Gentiles. Well, Paul says, no, I'm going to go the opposite direction. Let me give you this real quick before we get into 22. Now, Paul, remember, Ephesus, man, Paul was evangelizing this whole area up here. Corinth, Thessalonica, that's where Thessalonians was written, Philippi, Corinthians, Ephesians, Colossians, Galatians, all this area. Now, Rome is way over here. Paul is, and instead of, where did he leave from? Somewhere around in here. Instead of going to Rome like God wanted him to, he goes plumb the opposite direction, and he goes back over here to Jerusalem, and God says, I'm going to tell you, Paul, this is not a good idea. I don't want you going there. I want you going to Rome and preaching to the Gentiles. Well, Paul has a good motive. He wants to see his Jewish brethren saved. So he goes back, and ever since he's been there, he's had trouble. Now, let me explain something else before we get, this, because Miss Carol brought up a good question last week after we closed out, and I want to address some of this stuff to get us, hopefully, Rome. When you see this whole area, matter of fact, it was bigger than what's on this map. Rome was in control of this whole area. You remember? Even Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem. But who did he have to go before to get that approval? Pontius Pilate. Pilate was a Roman. Rome, you couldn't kill anybody unless Rome approved it, because they were in charge of the whole region. Now, Ms. Carol brought up a good question. Why in the world would these Jews, these God-fearing Jews, they believe the God of heaven, why would they want to kill somebody like Paul, somebody like Stephen, and all these people? Well, remember, it was the Romans, it was the Jews that crucified Jesus. Pilate said, I don't find anything wrong with him. I find no fault in him. What y'all want me to do with him? They said, give us Barabbas and crucify him. Matter of fact, we get over here to chapter 7. Stephen is preaching. And he says it's the right thing, but it's the wrong thing to say in front of a Jewish crowd, because remember we talked about Jews, they believed in God. They believed in the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. The problem is when you say to a Jew that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, and he has come to be the king of the Jews, that's when the Jews get a little upset. Matter of fact, John the Baptist lost his head for that. Jesus got crucified for it. Stephen got stoned for it. And now we're seeing Paul getting persecuted for the same things. And when you say Jesus Christ is the King of the Jews, he is our coming Messiah, that's when the Jews get a little upset. And so that's what we're referring to. I'll refer to that map here in just a second. Now, Paul is giving his testimony, and all of a sudden we got down. Remember, I'm not going to go over this again because it's long, but you'll have to watch last week and get all of that. But when Ananias told Paul, go get baptized and wash your sins away, we dealt with that last week, okay? That's found in verse 16 of 22. Now, let me read verse 17. Paul is fixing to tell about, here's another example of him not supposed to go to Jerusalem. Verse 17, and it come to pass that when I was come again to Jerusalem, even while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance, and saw him saying unto me, saw the Lord saying, make haste, and get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, for they will not receive thy testimony concerning me. And I said, Lord, they know I imprisoned and beat in every synagogue them that believed on thee. And when the blood of the martyr Stephen was shed, that's in chapter 7, I also was standing by and consenting unto his death, and kept the raiment of them that slew him. And he said unto me, depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. Y'all see that word Gentiles? Watch this, verse 22. And they gave him audience. In other words, they listened to everything Paul was saying until he said that word. And they gave him audience until this word. And then lifted up their voices and said, away with such a fella from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. Y'all see that? And as they cried out and cast their clothes and threw dust into the air, like a bunch of animals, the chief captain commanded that he brought into the castle, and bade that he should be examined by scourging, and he might know whereof they cried so against him. Now, the Apostle Paul, he's to give his testimony, and he said the wrong word. It is the word Gentiles. Jews and Gentiles don't like one another. And Paul's saying, hey, God has died for the Gentiles just as much as he has the Jews. And boy, when they said that, they lifted up their voice. They start getting upset. And the chief captain had to intervene and get him out of the way because they was fixing to kill Paul. Again, God is watching over the Apostle Paul because they would have killed him. Now watch this. The reason I keep drawing that point. Watch. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, Titus, 1st, 2nd Timothy hadn't been written yet. Right? So they can't kill him because God still wants him to write these books. Right? So you see God intervene and protect Paul from getting killed so Paul can get his hind end to Rome and start writing these books that we haven't gotten yet. All right? Now, remember? 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, Galatians, Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians have all been written, chapter 18, 19, 20, 21, so on and so forth in there. These books have been already on paper. The books that we're missing is these books that are written in black, and those books are not written until Paul gets into a Roman prison cell. And these are what we call prison epistles. They were written while Paul was in jail, in prison. 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, Galatians, Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians was written what they call the Acts epistles, during the Acts. These books in black were written after Acts 28 when Paul's in Rome. So that gives you a little context, okay? Now, to finish up, they're fixing to scourge Paul. Well, Paul pulls his citizenship out and shows that he's a Roman citizen, okay? To keep from getting beat. I mean, you better, he's trying everything he can. So that happens in 25, 26, and so on and so forth to finish out the chapter. All right, chapter 23. And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, he's in front of the Sanhedrin, bunch of Pharisees and Sadducees. He earnestly beholding the council said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. And the high priest, Ananias, commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Paul has just got one sentence to say. He said, Brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. Well, the Ananias says, hey, pop him in the mouth. Now watch Paul. Now Paul's saved. Paul's a preacher. But Paul hadn't always been a preacher and hadn't always been saved. Watch what he said. Verse 2, And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto them, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? In other words, he said, you smite me, God smack you. In other words, he was talking to, he says, you whited, it's almost like he was calling him a phony, hypocrite. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? And they that stood by said, now, I'm telling y'all, if you don't know the personality of the Apostle Paul, you see it in his in just this text. Watch. In other words, look, he got upset. Somebody popped him in the mouth. Wouldn't you get up? I don't care how saved you are. And so he mouths off something, and in verse 4, and they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? In other words, Paul, you are disrespecting. Now get this. Stay with me right here. Paul, the reason we smacked you in the mouth is because you're disrespecting this high priest that's standing before you. Now what? Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest. Now, y'all didn't laugh, and okay, let me explain it to you why it's funny. Do y'all realize when Jesus Christ dies on the cross, he's buried, he rose again the third day, and he goes back up into heaven, he sits down at the right hand of God the Father, he becomes the high priest of this church age, and there are no high priest on this earth anymore after Jesus takes the seat. He's our high priest. Hebrews 10, 11, 12. So Paul looks at him and said, I didn't know he was a high priest. I thought Jesus was. Now, he's in jail, all right? So they've already popped him on the mouth. He's already got upset about that. And then they said, the reason we popped you on the mouth is because you're disrespecting the high priest. He's up there in his robes and all of that. Paul's like, oh, I didn't know it. It's obvious that he's supposedly the high priest. So anybody in the room would know that's the high priest. But Paul said, oh, I didn't know he was the high priest. I thought Jesus was. Verse 6. But when Paul perceived that one part was Sadducees and the other Pharisees, remember I told you the Sanhedrin made up of Pharisees, Sadducees, two different groups, he cried out in the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, and the hope and resurrection of the dead I'm called in question. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. Why? For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. In other words, you got the Sanhedrin. You got the Pharisees on one side, you got the Sadducees on the other. The Pharisees believe in the resurrection, they believe in angels, they believe in spirits. The Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection, they don't believe in angels, and they don't believe in spirits. And so what Paul does, he's standing before them, and so he divides and conquers. He says, y'all are standing here before me, one group, trying to judge me, and y'all don't even believe right. They believe the same thing. So now he's done caused a division between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Verse 9, and there arose a great cry. And the scribes that were the Pharisees' part strove, saying, in other words, they agree with Paul. Paul believes in the resurrection. He believes in angels. He believes in the spirits. And so the Pharisees, they side with Paul, and the Sadducees are ready to kill him. Verse 10, but when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and to bring him in the castle. Again, God delivers Paul again. Verse 11, and the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, even though you wasn't supposed to go, you did come down here and testify on my behalf. I appreciate you for it. I tried to tell you not to come. That's all in the Greek there, okay? As though thou hast testified to me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at where? Rome. That's where I want you to go. Now, Paul, here's the deal. God wanted Paul to go where? To Rome. He's in Jerusalem. God's like, Paul, you can either go to Rome in a Cadillac or you can go in the back of a cop car, but you're going to Rome. One way or the other. I got to get these books written. So either you can go in a Cadillac, smooth sailing in the will of God, or you can go in the back of a cop car, you can go through a storm named Euroclydon and get snake bit over there on the Isle of Miletus and all this kind of stuff, but you're going to make it to Rome. You may not even have any hair when you get there. You may not have any clothes on your back when you get there, but you're going. You may go kicking and screaming, but you're going. Let's see, verse 12. Now here's this is funny. Verse 12. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together. They made a pact and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. They bound together. They said, we're making an oath right now. Raise your right hand. We're making an oath right now. I ain't eating nothing. I ain't drinking nothing till that man's dead. Now, here's what's funny about that. In chapter 25, we won't get there tonight, but in chapter 25, it's 2 years later, and guess what? Paul's still living. I wonder if them guys ever ate anything. So they make a pact. All right, verse 13. And they were more than 40 which had this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and elders, and they said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse, that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now therefore, ye with the council signify to the chief priest. Now, let me explain what they're doing. They went to the chief captain here, and they said, hey, bring Paul from the castle, bring him down, here, and when y'all bring him down, we're going to be lying in wait, and we're going to jump out at the right moment, and we're going to kill him so we can go eat something. Okay? So here's your little money, and so just bring him down this hallway, and when he comes down at this little hallway right here at this certain time, we'll pounce out. You won't know any different, and he'll just be murdered and nothing of the sort. Okay? Well, while they're finding that out, Paul's little nephew overhears the conversation. He's got the room tapped, like the FBI, It's in there. You just got to read it. He overhears it. He goes, tells Paul, hey, Paul, they finna kill you. Anyway, it's a funny story. Let me read it to you. Give you a story. Verse number 15. Now, therefore, ye with the council signify to the chief captain that to bring him down on the morrow, as though he would inquire something more perfectly concerning him, or we ever become near, or ready to kill him. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, bring this young man, my nephew, unto the chief captain, for he has a certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul, the prisoner called me unto thee and pray me to bring this young man unto thee who hath something to say to thee. And the chief captain took him by the hand, went aside privately, and asked him, what is it thou hast to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed, desire thee, that thou wouldest bring down Paul on the morrow on the council, as they would inquire something more perfectly. In other words, just make up something to bring Paul down through here, and make up some reason you got to bring him down this certain hallway, and we're going to be lying in there to wait and kill him. Verse 21, but do not thou yield unto them. For there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath, that they will neither eat nor drink till they've killed him, and now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee. So the chief captain then let the young men depart, charged him, see thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me. Again, God intervenes in Paul's life. Now, the reason I point that out, how many of y'all, I'm guilty, you're going down the highway, headed to Jackson, 412, whatever, wherever you're going, Memphis, don't matter, and you have a wreck, or excuse me, not a wreck, you have a flat tire. Have a flat tire, and you get upset. You're late, you got to get there, you got a flat tire. You got to stop what you're doing, get out, change this thing, and God is saving you from something on down the road that we don't know anything about. And sometimes we're getting fussy, I got this flat tire, I'm in a hurry, I got to get there. And all of a sudden we need to stop and think, well, God, you may be intervening in my life unbeknownst to me. And God is intervening in his life, and it's just amazing to see. Now, verse 23, he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, make ready. Now, the word, all right, they're going to, this chief captain here, to keep Paul from getting killed. They're in Jerusalem, okay? Let me show you. Am I right here? They're in Jerusalem, right there, all right? And so they're plotting to kill him. So this chief captain gets a bunch of soldiers, we're fixing to read it, and they're fixing to sneak Paul and take him up to Caesarea, right here. Caesarea is where Felix is. Right up here where Caesarea. He's the governor. He's a Roman governor. All right. Verse 23, and he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70. Now, score is 20, so 70 is 60, and 10 is 70. And spearmen 200. At the 3rd hour of the night, that's 9 p.m., 3rd hour of the night. 6 p.m. is the 1st hour of the night. 7, 8, 7, 8, 9. That's the third hour of the night, 9 p.m. So they sneak him out of town 9 p.m. at night, verse 24, and provide them beasts that they may set Paul on and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter after this manner. Now, here we're fixing to read a letter that this chief captain has written to Felix. Verse 26, Claudius Lucius, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sending greeting. This man was taken of the Jews, and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. He pulled his Roman citizenship out on me. And when I would have known the cause whereof they accused him, I brought him forth into their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or bonds. And when it was told me how that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee and gave commandment to his accusers also to say before thee what thou hast against him. Farewell. There's the end of the letter. Then the soldiers, as they were commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night unto Antipas, him. On the morrow, they left the horsemen to go with him, and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea, delivered the epistle to the governor, presenting Paul also. In other words, they delivered Paul to Caesarea, and they handed a letter, said, hey, here's this guy right here, read this letter. And we just read the letter. Verse 34, and when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. And when he understood that he was Cilicia, I will hear thee, said he. Then thine accusers, when thine accusers are also come, and he commanded him to keep in Herod's judgment hall. Now we're fixing to read in verse 20, in chapter 24, the Apostle Paul before Governor Felix. And after 5 days, Ananias the high priest, you remember that's the guy that smacked him in the mouth, or had him smacked in the mouth, descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. All right, this Tertullus guy, he's representing these Jews over here. He's sort of like the prosecuting attorney. Paul's over here in handcuffs. Governor Felix is there. And we got the Sanhedrin over here, and they got a spokesman. His name is Tertullus, and he's supposed to be bringing the evidence against Paul. So you got almost like a courtroom scene going on right here. All right, here's the accusation, verse 2. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, all right, so here's bringing his evidence. Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. Boy, he's really building up Governor Felix. We accepted always, in all places, most notable Felix with all thankfulness, notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of this clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain, Lucius, came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanded his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. So there's the state side. Tertullus says, hey, this guy defamed the temple, and he's rabble-rouser, and he stirs up people, and he's causing trouble and all through the whole place. Okay? Now, verse 10 starts Paul. Paul is able to speak for himself. Verse 10, then Paul, after the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answering, for as much as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself. I don't have an attorney. I'm representing myself. Verse 11, because thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went to Jerusalem for to worship Governor Felix, all I did was go to Jerusalem. All I wanted to do was worship. I go to a church and worship in Jerusalem. Verse 12, and they neither found me in the temple disputing with anybody, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogue nor in the city. I didn't start nothing. Neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, the way, when Paul says the way, Jesus said, I am the way. Jesus is the way. Paul is preaching the way. The Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Sanhedrin are saying the way that you're preaching, Paul, is heresy. That's what he's saying. Verse 14, but this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow. But there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. And herein do I exercise myself, to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. Now after many years I came bring alms to my nation and offerings. Whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with turmoil, who ought to have been here before thee, and object if they have aught against me. Or else let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me, while I stood before the council. Except it be for the one voice that I cried, standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day. Paul says, I preach the resurrection of the dead. I've preached Jesus crucified, resurrected from the dead. I preach the resurrection of the just and the unjust. I go to church to worship just like they do. I don't cause any trouble. Nobody has ever seen me cause any trouble with any man in the temple. Everything they've accused me of, they have no proof of. All I've done was preach the resurrection of the dead, and that's why I'm standing before you today. And verse 22, and when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them and said, when Lysias the chief captain shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. And he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintances to minister or to come unto him. Let me pause and comment on that, because we're way ahead of the game right here. Governor Felix liked what Paul had to say. He was intrigued by what Paul had to say. I'll prove that in just a minute. And to settle them down. You ever seen a judge take something under advisement? He won't make a ruling that day while the plaintiff and the defendant is there. He said, let me take this under advisement, and I will write you my order, and I'll mail it to you. And then he sits back, deliberates, and he'll write a letter saying, this is my order, and he mails it to he puts it off where he's not having to do it in court. Felix puts them off. They're wanting to kill him. Felix is like, I like the dude. I like what he's saying. I would like to hear some more. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait till this chief captain can come up here to Caesarea, and I can get some more knowledge about this thing. Y'all go on home. We're not going to kill him today. Y'all go on home, and I'm going to wait and get some more information. And then he tells the jailer, the centurion, he says, put him in jail, but give him liberty. No handcuffs, no ankle irons, and anybody that wants to come see him. Let anybody that wants to come see him, see him. So Paul is in jail, but he's free. God again intervening in his life. He's in jail, but he's free. No handcuffs. And Luke, his physician, is able to come in, minister to him. Anybody that won't come in and see Paul was able to come in and see Paul. That's what that means. Verse 23, and he commanded a centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintances to minister or to come unto him. Now verse 24, watch this. And after certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. In other words, he's like, after he got the courtroom cleared, the next day, he's like, bring Paul back out. I want him to preach to me again. Felix is an unsaved man. Okay, and you're going, that's odd. Well, remember, do y'all remember King Herod? He liked John the Baptist. He was an unsaved man, but he liked John the Baptist. He liked for him to preach to him. But because of his wife Herodias, she's the one that had John the Baptist's head cut off. But King Herod liked to hear him preach. Y'all remember that one time where King Herod came to hear John the Baptist preach, and John the Baptist changed his sermon and said, King Herod, you're living with your brother's wife, and it ain't right. And son, I'm talking about rips him his hat off. You know, King Herod's just like, you're right, that's good preaching. He didn't change the way he's living, but he's like, hey, you're right, that's good preaching. Well, this is the way Felix is. Felix is like, Paul, come preach to me again. Now watch. Verse 24, let me read it again. After certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, she was a Jewess. In other words, she was she wasn't a Jewish believer. She was born a Jew. He sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. And as he reasoned of this is Paul's sermon, righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come. There's his 3 points. Righteousness, Jesus Christ, righteous. Temperance and judgment. Felix, if you don't get right with God, if you don't get saved, judgment is coming upon you. The judgment of the quick and the dead, the just and the unjust. Felix trembled. Y'all see that? That means he was under conviction. We don't see that much anymore. You remember back, you hear them in the old days where people got into conviction. They'd grip the back of the pew and they, until their knuckles turned white. Y'all remember them days? The old revivals, man, where the preacher's preaching hot and heavy, and people, the invitation is coming, please come to Christ, and man, they grip the back of that pew, and they don't want to turn loose because they're afraid they have to come, and they're under conviction, they're trembling. We don't see that much anymore. You see why? Because, there's a lot of reasons, but a lot of churches ain't preaching the truth anymore. Nothing to get trembled about. Felix trembled. And this is what he said. Go thy way for this time. When I have a convenient season, I will call for thee. He said, Felix, Paul, I like your sermon. And it's done moved me. It's moved me. But go your way. And if I want to get saved, I'll call you. You say, that's odd. People do that every Sunday. They walk out of here and they say, what Brother Jeremy said was good. I like it. Jesus Christ is the only one can save, but I'm going to wait till next Sunday. I'm going to do it Wednesday night. I'm going to come Wednesday night when there ain't many people, where I don't have to come, where there's not many people, and I'm going to get saved Wednesday night. Wednesday night rolls around and something comes up and it can't be here. And I say, all right, I'm going to wait and get saved Sunday. People do that all the time. That's what Felix did. Wait for a more convenient time. In other words, if Felix would have got saved, it would have cost him politically. His wife was a Jew, remember? Boy, can you imagine? Felix getting saved. And you're married to a Jew. Boy, don't you know she's going to chew his ear off if he gets saved. Anyway. Verse 26. Felix, hoped also that money should have been given unto him of Paul, that he might listen. Wherefore he sent him he sent for him the oftener and communed with him. Felix liked what Paul said. Matter of fact, often, that's what he said, often he called for Paul, said, come preach to me. Paul, I know you're in jail, but you got liberty. You're running the place back there. We give you liberty. Come preach to us. All the time. That's what he says. He was hoping. Now, a lot of times, if he would have given, they were hoping Paul had enough friends that would pay money to Felix and Felix could let him go. But everybody Paul knew was poor, didn't have any money. And so they couldn't give him money to pay for Paul to get out, that he might loose him, wherever he sent for him the oftener and commune with him. Now, verse 27. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. In other words, just to keep peace with the Jews, he left Paul in prison. But while he was in prison, he gave him liberty. Okay? He was in jail, but he had liberty. It wasn't, whatever you want to call it, minimal security, I guess you could say. And he kept him in jail just to keep the Jews, because it's a political thing. It happened when Jesus, remember Jesus, before Pontius Pilate said, "Man, I don't find any fault in him. I mean, I'm ready to let him go. And I'm wanting these Jews to say, yeah, let him go. But they wouldn't let him go. So politically, Pontius Pilate said, he comes up with this thing in the middle of the night, and he goes, okay, surely they won't let Barabbas, a murderer and a thief, surely they won't let him back in the community. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give them a choice, Barabbas or Jesus. And man, they flipped the script on him. They said, turn loose Barabbas, crucify Jesus. That's why Pilate went back, washed his hands. I've done all I could do politically. Well, Festus done all he could do. He liked Paul. King Herod liked John the Baptist. But politically, he couldn't let him go. And then you'll see this is where Festus comes into play. And in chapter 25, he goes before Festus, and then Paul appeals. In other words, you're Governor Felix. Festus becomes the new governor, and so in 25, there we go. And I think Paul appeals. In other words, like an appeal court, where you appeal to the higher court. Paul says, I need to go see Caesar. I need to be in his court. And before that, they said, well, they drop off and see King Agrippa. And you remember King Agrippa says, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Now, we're closing, because that's all I want to, like I said, y'all know what I'm saying? A lot of it's narrative now. Once you get 23, 24, 25, a lot of this is just narrative. Now, yes, it's Old English, Elizabethan English, the King James, and sometimes I'll tell you what something means or what it says there, but most of it's just narrative now, and so that's where we're at. But here's what I want to show you. Let me see if I can find the verse. It's Acts 9 something. Let me see if I got it up here. I got it somewhere. Acts 9. Back in previous. Hang on. Don't go to commercial right here. I got it somewhere. Thought I did. Here we go. Acts 9:15. Is it up there? Yeah. But the Lord said unto him, Lord said unto Paul, go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me. Paul is a chosen vessel unto the Lord to bear my name before the who? The Gentiles, and before who? Kings and the children of Israel. Now, Paul bore his name, children of Israel, Gentiles, and now these latter chapters, he's bearing the name of Christ before kings. King Agrippa. Now, watch this before we go. You're thinking, man, why don't God just open the doors like he did, back in 16, when Paul and Silas, why don't you just let, the jailhouse rock and open the prison doors and let them out? All right, remember this. Because Paul is in custody, he's able to preach and to give his testimony to high officials that the common man normally wouldn't be able to preach to. It'd be like, what is the chances of me getting in to see Governor Lee and giving him the gospel message. Now, I don't know if he claims to be a saved man. I'm not saying he's not. I'm saying, what are the chances? What are the chances of me getting in to see Biden and him remembering I was ever there? But somebody needs to preach the gospel to that man. But what's the chances of somebody getting into that level is what I'm saying. Paul is getting into that level. Matter of fact, Caesar in chapter 28, Caesar Augustus, being able to, not Caesar Augustus, be able to preach the gospel to a high up official like that because Paul is in prison. So, that's why Paul said this, whatever chapter and verse it is. He says, I have learned, whatever state I'm in, therewith to be content. Wherever God's got me, he's got me there for a reason, and so I'm going to use it for his glory.